In the world of U.S. jurisprudence, where professional ethics and personal beliefs often collide, a story unfolded that shook not only those involved but also the entire legal system of California. This is the tale of how the past can unexpectedly crash into the present, forcing a person to face a difficult choice between duty and the thirst for revenge. The Harper case is not just another court trial. It's a story about how thin the line is between justice and personal vendetta. Michael Donovan, a 45-year-old attorney from Los Angeles, was the embodiment of the American dream. Coming from a middle-class family, he showed exceptional abilities and determination from an early age. After graduating high school with honors, Michael entered Stanford Law School, where he quickly made a name for himself as one of the most promising students. After receiving his degree in 2004, Donovan began his career at a small law firm in San Francisco. His sharp mind, attention to detail, and ability to find unconventional solutions in complex cases did not go unnoticed. Within 3 years, he received an offer from one of the leading law firms in Los Angeles. By 2024, Michael Donovan had become one of the most sought-after criminal defense attorneys in Southern California. His track record included high-profile victories in cases that seemed hopeless. He specialized in defending clients accused of financial crimes and had a reputation for being able to find loopholes in the most challenging cases. Donovan's professional success was reflected in his personal life as well. He lived in a luxurious mansion in Beverly Hills, drove expensive cars, and regularly attended social events. However, behind the glamour lay a personal tragedy known only to his closest friends. In 2010, when Michael's career was just starting to take off, his family life collapsed. His wife, Sarah, with whom he had been together since their college years, left him for another man. The blow was so devastating that Donovan threw himself into his work, using it as a way to drown out the pain and disappointment. Although 14 years had passed since the divorce, Michael had never fully recovered. He never entered into another serious relationship, preferring short-term romances that required no emotional involvement. His colleagues and clients knew him as a brilliant professional, but few suspected the deep personal trauma he carried inside. In the spring of 2024, Michael Donovan was at the peak of his career. He had just won a complex corporate fraud case that garnered national attention. His name was all over legal publications, and the number of potential clients was growing by the day. It seemed like life had finally settled, and the past was behind him. However, fate had an unexpected twist in store for Michael. In early May, a new client came to his office with a case that, at first glance, seemed routine. It was a tax fraud accusation, an area where Donovan felt right at home. He had no idea that this case would turn his entire life upside down and force him to confront the ghosts of his past, which he had tried so hard to forget. On May 2, 2024, it was an unusually hot day for Los Angeles. Michael Donovan arrived at his office earlier than usual to prepare for a meeting with a new client. His assistant, Jennifer, informed him that Mr. Harper had scheduled a consultation regarding tax fraud charges. At 9 a.m., Donovan's office door opened, and in walked a man in his 50s, tall and fit, with graying temples and piercing gray eyes. "James Harper," he introduced himself, extending his hand. Michael automatically shook it, but something about the man's appearance made him wary. Harper began outlining the details of his case. He was the owner of a large construction company that was being accused of tax evasion amounting to over $10 million. According to Harper, the charges were the result of an accounting error, but the prosecution insisted the violations were intentional. As Harper spoke, Michael tried to figure out why the client seemed familiar. He was scanning through the documents Harper had provided when his eyes fell on the date of birth, September 15, 1974. That date triggered painful memories for Donovan. "Mr. Harper," he interrupted, "did you happen to live in San Francisco in the early 2010s? Harper paused for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, I lived there for a few years before moving to Los Angeles." "Why?" In that moment, everything clicked into place. Michael realized why Harper looked familiar. He was the man who had destroyed his family 14 years ago. James Harper was the man his wife Sarah had left him for. Donovan felt a wave of anger rising inside him. He clenched his fists under the desk, trying to maintain his professional composure. "Mr. Harper," he said, striving to keep his voice even, "I think we need to discuss something before we proceed." Harper looked puzzled. "What exactly, Mr. Donovan? Do you know a woman named Sarah Donovan?" Michael asked, watching the client's reaction closely. Harper's face changed. He clearly recognized the name. "Yes, I knew her. We were together a few years ago. But what does that have to do with? I'm her ex-husband." Michael cut him off. "And I think that creates a serious conflict of interest in your case." A heavy silence filled the room. Harper looked stunned, as if he couldn't believe the coincidence. Michael, meanwhile, wrestled with the urge to throw the man out of his office. I didn't know," Harper finally said. "If this is an issue, I can find another lawyer." Michael took a deep breath. Professional ethics required him to turn down the case. But a part of him, the part still wounded by betrayal, saw an opportunity. A chance to find out what had happened with Sarah, why she left, and maybe even get revenge on the man who had destroyed his life. "No, Mr. Harper," Michael said after a pause. "I think we can continue working on your case, but we will need to establish some very clear boundaries." Harper nodded, still looking uncertain. "Of course, whatever you say." Michael knew he was making a risky decision. He understood that mixing personal feelings with professional matters was dangerous, but the temptation was too great. He decided he could manage his emotions and still provide Harper with proper legal representation, despite their past. The meeting continued, but the atmosphere in the room had changed. Every word, every gesture now carried a double meaning. Michael tried to focus on the details of the tax case, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Sarah and the events of 14 years ago. When Harper finally left, Michael sat alone in his office, trying to process what had just happened. He knew he was stepping onto a dangerous path, but he couldn't resist the temptation. Harper's case was no longer just about a client. It was a chance for Michael to finally confront the ghosts of his past. In the following days, Michael Donovan immersed himself in studying James Harper's case, trying to approach it from a professional perspective. However, thoughts of the past continued to haunt him. On May 15th, during their next meeting, Michael decided it was time to clarify the situation. "Mr. Harper," he began, "before we continue discussing your case, I'd like to ask you a few personal questions. It may seem inappropriate, but trust me, it's important for our cooperation." Harper tensed but nodded. "I understand. Go ahead." Michael took a deep breath. "Tell me about your relationship with Sarah. How did you meet? What happened after she left me?" James Harper remained silent for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. "We met at a charity event in San Francisco in early 2010. Sarah was the event organizer and I was one of the sponsors. There was an immediate connection between us, but she was married, and we tried to keep things strictly friendly." Michael listened, trying to keep a neutral expression, though inside, his emotions were boiling. Harper continued. "We started seeing each other more often, talking a lot. Sarah told me about the problems in her marriage, how she felt lonely and misunderstood. I fell in love with her." "And you convinced her to leave me," Michael said coldly. "No," Harper shook his head. "I never asked her to do that. Sarah made the decision to leave on her own. She said you had become completely absorbed in your work, that there was no closeness between you anymore. I just happened to be there at the right time." Michael felt the old pain welling up inside him. "What happened then? Why aren't you together now?" Harper's face darkened. "We were together for almost 3 years. It was a difficult time. Sarah often thought about you, felt guilty for leaving. Our relationship became more and more strained. Eventually, she decided she needed to start fresh, without either of us. She left and I never saw her again." Michael was stunned. All these years, he had imagined Sarah happy with Harper, and the thought had tormented him. But the reality was quite different. "Do you know where she is now?" Donovan asked. Harper shook his head. "The last I heard, she moved to Europe. But that was many years ago." A heavy silence fell between them. Michael struggled to process the information. He had always blamed Harper for the collapse of his marriage, but now the picture was becoming more complicated. "Mr. Donovan," Harper broke the silence, "I understand that I caused you pain. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I want you to know, I deeply regret how things turned out." Michael looked at the man he had considered his enemy for so many years. He saw genuine remorse and exhaustion in Harper's eyes, the same feelings he had been carrying inside himself. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Harper," Michael finally said. "It doesn't change the past, but it helps me understand it. Now let's get back to your case. We still have a lot of work to do." The rest of the meeting was spent discussing the defense strategy for the tax fraud case. However, the atmosphere in the office had shifted. The tension between them had lessened, replaced by a quiet understanding between two people bound by a shared past. When Harper left, Michael sat at his desk for a long time, lost in thought. The conversation had reopened old wounds, but it had also brought unexpected relief. He realized that for years, he had been holding on to anger and resentment, feelings that were now beginning to release their grip on him. Michael opened a drawer and pulled out an old photograph of him and Sarah, young and happy. He stared at the picture, realizing it was time to let go of the past and move forward. But first, he had to defend the man he had long considered his enemy. On May 20th, 2024, Michael Donovan sat in his office, engrossed in studying the financial documents of Harper's company. The deeper he delved into the case, the clearer it became that the situation was much more complex than initially thought. While analyzing the accounting reports, Michael discovered several discrepancies that could indicate deliberate tax evasion. The scheme was intricate and well-concealed, but Donovan's experienced eye was able to pinpoint the key elements. This revelation put him in a difficult ethical position. On one hand, professional duty required Michael to do everything possible to defend his client. On the other hand, if Harper was indeed guilty of intentional tax fraud, aiding his defense conflicted with Donovan's personal moral principles. That same day, Michael scheduled a meeting with Harper. When the client entered the office, Donovan went straight to the point. "Mr. Harper, I've reviewed your company's documents and found some discrepancies. I need to know the truth. Did you intentionally evade taxes?" Harper turned pale. He was silent for a long time before sighing heavily. "Mr. Donovan, I didn't intend for this to happen. It started with a small mistake in reporting. When I realized it allowed us to save a significant amount, I didn't correct it. Over time, it turned into a system." Michael felt a surge of anger rising within him. "Do you understand that this is a serious crime? Why didn't you tell me the truth right away?" "I was afraid," Harper admitted. "Afraid of losing everything I built. And then, when I learned about our past, I thought you wouldn't want to help me if you knew the truth." Donovan stood up and walked to the window, trying to gather his thoughts. Part of him wanted to immediately withdraw from the case and report everything to the authorities. But another part, the part still stinging from betrayal, saw an opportunity for revenge. "Mr. Harper," Michael finally said, turning back to his client, "I find myself in a very difficult position. As your lawyer, I am obligated to protect your interests, but as a citizen and a person who adheres to certain moral principles, I cannot turn a blind eye to deliberate legal violations." Harper looked despondent. "I understand. Will you withdraw from the case?" Michael took a deep breath. "No, I will continue working on your case, but we will approach it differently. We will develop a strategy to minimize the damage, but you need to be prepared to admit your guilt and repay the unpaid taxes." "But that means I'll lose the company, everything I've built," Harper protested. "Possibly," Donovan nodded. "But it's better than prison, and it will give you a chance to start over, just as Sarah did once." The mention of his ex-wife's name caused both men to fall silent. They looked at each other, realizing how intertwined their fates had become. "All right," Harper finally said. "I trust you, Mr. Donovan. Do what you think is right." Michael nodded. "I'll prepare all the necessary documents. In the meantime, I advise you to seriously consider how you will explain your actions to the court and the public." After Harper left, Michael sat at his desk for a long time, contemplating his decision. He understood that he had chosen a difficult path, one that could jeopardize his own career. But for the first time in many years, he felt that he was doing the right thing. Donovan opened his laptop and began working on a new defense strategy. He knew that the coming weeks would be among the toughest in his career, but he was ready for the challenge. After all, this was not just another case. It was an opportunity to finally close a painful chapter of his life and, perhaps, find redemption not only for Harper but for himself as well. Michael Donovan's investigation into James Harper's case took a dramatic turn on June 3, 2024. As he delved deeper into the financial documents, he uncovered a complex scheme of tax evasion. The more he studied, the clearer it became that the case was far more intricate than initially thought. During a meeting with Emily Chun, a financial analyst known for her impartiality, Michael was shown the depth of the fraudulent activity. Emily's analysis revealed systematic underreporting of income and the use of fictitious expenses. The total amount of unpaid taxes amounted to approximately $12.7 million, not including penalties and fines. The scale of the violations was enormous, and Michael knew that completely exonerating Harper was nearly impossible. However, Emily pointed out a potential mitigating factor. A significant portion of the tax savings had been directed towards charitable donations, which could potentially influence the court's perception of Harper's intentions. Just as Michael was processing this new information, Jennifer, his assistant, interrupted with a call from FBI agent Robert Taylor. Taylor requested an urgent meeting, which added another layer of tension to the already fraught case. That evening, Michael met with Agent Taylor at a small cafe near his office. Taylor, a tall man with a keen gaze, wasted no time getting to the point. "Mr. Donovan, we've been monitoring financial misconduct in the construction industry for some time. Your client's company came under scrutiny not by chance. We believe Mr. Harper is involved in a much larger criminal scheme." Michael's heart raced. "What do you mean?" Taylor handed over a folder. "We have evidence that Harper's company was used for laundering money for a major drug cartel. The tax evasion was just the tip of the iceberg." Michael was stunned. The documents indicated that Harper's involvement went far beyond financial misconduct and touched on serious criminal activities. "Why are you telling me this?" Michael asked, trying to grasp the gravity of the situation. "We're offering your client a deal," Taylor replied. "If Harper agrees to cooperate and provide information about his connections with the cartel, we might consider a reduction in his sentence." This revelation turned the case upside down. Michael now faced not only the challenge of defending Harper against tax evasion charges, but also the moral and legal dilemma of how to handle the new, more serious allegations. As he left the cafe, Michael was weighed down by the enormity of the decision ahead. He was about to confront Harper with information that could potentially alter the course of his life and unravel even deeper layers of corruption and crime. Michael's thoughts were consumed by the realization that the man who had once shattered his personal life was now entangled in crimes that had likely devastated countless others. The upcoming conversation with Harper would be one of the toughest challenges Michael had ever faced in his career. June 10, 2024, the United States Federal Court in Los Angeles began an important trial involving James Harper, one of the most high-profile cases of the year. The courtroom was packed with journalists, law enforcement representatives, and citizens eager to learn the outcome of the case. Michael Donovan, sitting next to his client, felt the tension of those present. After intense negotiations with Harper and FBI representatives, it was decided to plead guilty in exchange for cooperation with the prosecution. Judge Elizabeth Morgan opened the proceedings with her characteristic strictness and impartiality. "This is the case of the United States versus James Harper. Defendant, please stand and state your name for the record." Harper slowly stood up. "James Harper, Your Honor." "Mr. Harper, do you understand the charges against you?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Harper replied with a trembling voice. Prosecutor David Chong, an energetic young man with a reputation for being a relentless prosecutor, stood up to read the indictment. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began. Before you is a man who not only systematically defrauded the government by evading millions of dollars in taxes, but also actively participated in money laundering for one of the largest drug cartels in the country. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Michael could feel Harper's anxiety beside him. Chong continued, "We will present evidence showing how Mr. Harper used his construction company to hide illegal income, manipulated financial records, and how his actions facilitated the spread of drugs in our cities." When the prosecutor finished, Judge Morgan turned to Michael. "Mr. Donovan, is your client ready to enter a plea?" Michael stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. My client pleads guilty to all charges." The courtroom buzzed again. The judge called for order. "Mr. Harper," she addressed the defendant, "do you confirm that you are pleading guilty voluntarily and understand the consequences of this decision?" "Yes, Your Honor," Harper replied quietly. The next few hours were devoted to detailing the criminal scheme. The prosecutor presented numerous documents, witness testimonies, and financial reports demonstrating the extent of Harper's crimes. When it was time for the defense, Michael stood up, feeling the weight of the room's gaze. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "my client fully admits his guilt and deeply regrets his actions. He is prepared to face the consequences, but I request the court to consider several important factors." Donovan spoke about Harper's cooperation with the prosecution and the information he had provided that would aid in combating the drug cartel. He also mentioned Harper's charitable activities, emphasizing that a significant portion of the illegally obtained funds had been directed to helping those in need. "My client has committed serious crimes," Donovan concluded, "but he is not a monster. He is a man who lost his way and now sincerely wishes to make amends to society." The final part of the trial involved testimonies from witnesses. Among them were people who had suffered due to the activities of the drug cartel Harper had worked with. Their emotional stories of ruined lives and lost loved ones caused many in the courtroom, including Harper, to lower their eyes. When all the evidence was presented, Judge Morgan called a recess for sentencing. Michael and Harper were left alone in the deliberation room. "What do you think the sentence will be?" Harper asked, nervously fiddling with his tie. Michael shook his head. "Honestly, I don't know. We've done everything we could. Now we just have to wait." An hour later, the court reconvened to announce the sentence. Judge Morgan looked serious and focused. "Mr. Harper, please stand," she said. "Considering the severity of your crimes and their impact on society, and taking into account your cooperation with the prosecution and your guilty plea, the court sentences you to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Additionally, you are required to pay a fine of $20 million and to reimburse all unpaid taxes." Harper received the sentence with visible relief. Michael understood that his client had expected a much harsher punishment. When the session was closed and Harper was taken away, Michael remained in the empty courtroom, reflecting on the strange twists of fate that had led him to this moment. He felt a mix of professional satisfaction and emotional exhaustion. Leaving the courthouse, Donovan was met by a crowd of journalists. "Mr. Donovan, how do you comment on the verdict?" they shouted in unison. Michael stopped and said, "Justice has been served. My client has admitted his guilt and is ready to face the consequences. I hope this case serves as a lesson to anyone who thinks they can deceive the law and avoid responsibility." 3 months had passed since James Harper's sentencing. Michael Donovan was gradually returning to his normal routine, trying to leave behind the emotional strain of the recent months. However, fate had a new surprise in store for him. On September 15, 2024, on his day off, Michael decided to take a walk in a park near his home. The autumn air was crisp, and the fallen leaves rustled underfoot. Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice that took his breath away. "Michael? Michael Donovan." He turned and saw her, Sarah. His ex-wife stood a few meters away, still beautiful, but with a touch of gray in her hair and wrinkles around her eyes. "Sarah?" Michael said, unable to believe his eyes. "What are you doing here?" She walked closer. "I moved back to Los Angeles a month ago. I'm working with an international charity organization. And you're still here." They stood there, looking at each other, unsure of what to say. Years of separation, grievances, and unspoken words hung between them. "I heard about Harper's case," Sarah finally said. "It was in all the news. You defended him?" Michael nodded. "Yes, it was difficult. I can only imagine," she said quietly. "Michael, I need to apologize to you for everything that happened back then." Donovan felt a wave of emotion rise in his chest. "It's been so many years, Sarah. Why dredge up the past?" "Because I need to say it," she replied. "I made a mistake leaving you. I thought I'd find happiness with James, but everything turned out to be completely different from what I imagined." They walked slowly down the path as Sarah shared her story. How her relationship with Harper quickly became strained. How she felt guilty and lost. How she had moved to Europe trying to start a new life. "I've thought a lot about you over the years," Sarah admitted. "I hoped you were happy, that you found someone." Michael shook his head. "No, I never remarried. Work became my life." They stopped by a small pond. Sarah looked into Michael's eyes. "You know, when I heard about Harper's case, I thought it was a sign that maybe it's time to try to make things right." Donovan felt his heart start to race. "What do you mean, Sarah?" "I don't know, Michael," she said. "I just know that I missed something important when I left you, and I'd like to, if you're willing, try again." Michael looked at the woman he once loved more than life itself. He thought about the years of loneliness, the pain of betrayal, and how much he had changed during that time. At the same time, he felt something long forgotten beginning to stir in his soul. "Sarah, I don't know what to say," he finally said. "So much time has passed. We've both changed." She nodded. "I understand, and I'm not asking for an immediate answer. Just, maybe we could start with a cup of coffee? Talk. Get to know each other again." Michael took a deep breath. Part of him wanted to agree immediately, while another part screamed to be cautious, not to let himself get hurt again. "Okay," he finally said. "Let's start with coffee." They exchanged phone numbers and arranged to meet in a few days. After Sarah left, Michael stood by the pond for a long time, watching the water and contemplating the strange twists of fate. He thought about Harper, now in prison, his career which could change after the high-profile case, and the possibility of starting over with the woman he once loved. Michael didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in many years, he felt ready to embrace new possibilities. Harper's case, which had seemed like a curse, had unexpectedly become a catalyst for change in his life. Returning home, Donovan resolved that, regardless of how things turned out with Sarah, he would no longer live in the past. It was time to move forward, and he was ready for that journey. 6 months had passed since Michael and Sarah's unexpected meeting in the park. During this time, Donovan's life had undergone many changes. On March 15, 2025, Michael was sitting in his office, reviewing documents for a new case. His career had soared since the Harper trial, and he had become one of the most sought-after attorneys in Los Angeles, specializing in complex financial crimes. The phone rang. It was Sarah. "Hi, Michael. Don't forget about our dinner tonight," her voice said. "Of course not. I'll pick you up at 7, Donovan replied with a smile. Over the past few months, their relationship had slowly but surely developed. They started with a few awkward coffee dates and gradually moved to longer, more candid conversations. Both were cautious, afraid of repeating past mistakes, but they felt a connection rekindling between them. That evening, as they sat in a cozy restaurant, Michael and Sarah discussed recent events. "I received a letter from James," Sarah said suddenly. Michael tensed. "From Harper? What does he say?" "He's apologizing for everything. He says prison has made him reevaluate his life. He's participating in a rehabilitation program, helping other inmates." Donovan thoughtfully shook his head. "You know, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad for him. I hope he really changes." Sarah looked at Michael intently. "And you've changed, Michael. I can see it." "Yes, probably," he agreed. "That case, it clarified a lot for me. It made me see things differently." "And how do you see things now?" Sarah asked. Michael took a deep breath. I've realized that you can't live in the past, that you need to learn to forgive both others and yourself, and that sometimes life gives us a second chance, if we're ready to take it. Sarah reached out and squeezed Michael's hand. I've also learned a lot over the years, about myself, about us, about what really matters in life. They looked at each other, and Michael felt old wounds finally healing, making way for something new and bright. You know, he said, I think we both deserve that second chance. Sarah smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. I'm so glad to hear that, Michael. As they left the restaurant and walked slowly through the evening streets of Los Angeles, hand in hand, Michael marveled at the strange way life worked. The case of the man who had once torn apart his family had ultimately led to its reunion. The next day, Michael received an unexpected call. It was FBI agent Robert Taylor. Mr. Donovan, I have good news. Thanks to the information provided by Harper, we were able to deliver a significant blow to the drug cartel. There was a major operation yesterday, and over 50 people were arrested. Michael felt a sense of satisfaction. I'm glad to hear that, Agent Taylor. So, Harper's cooperation really made a difference. Without a doubt. And in light of this, and considering Harper's exemplary behavior in prison, the prosecution is considering reducing his sentence. After the conversation with Taylor, Michael sat for a long time, reflecting. He thought about Harper, about himself, about Sarah, and the unexpected paths fate had brought them all together. That evening, Michael met Sarah in the park where they had first reunited after a long separation. Sarah, he said, looking into her eyes, I've realized a lot during this time, and most importantly, I've realized that I still love you. Will you marry me? Again? Sarah cried and hugged him tightly. Yes, Michael. Yes. Standing there in each other's arms, they both felt they had finally found what they had been searching for all these years. Forgiveness, understanding, and love. And somewhere far away, in a prison cell, James Harper wrote another letter, hoping that one day he could atone for his sins and start a new life, just as Michael and Sarah had. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories that are coming out every day.